Presented and produced by the National Public Housing Museum, Out of the Archives is our oral history podcast created from interviews with public housing residents from across the United States. We are your hosts, Jellystone
and Liu.
Welcome to Season 5 of Out of the Archives, Black Creative Innovation in Chicago Public Housing.
Wow, it's so great to be back. I'm really excited to share what we've been working on.
Yes, last season we looked across the country from Chicago to Miami to New York, diving deeply into the 20th century history of public housing residents' fight against displacement and demolition of public housing, and for the protection and reverence of their memories about these places. If you've not gotten a chance to listen, we highly encourage you to check it out.
The format of our past Out of the Archives episodes included short clips from multiple narrators. This season, we've decided to focus each episode on one narrator, abridging each interview from prominent Chicago artists and pioneers on the innovative creative practices they cultivated while living in the projects, practices that continue to shape the world as we know it.
We are trying out this new format because, though we enjoy placing multiple stories together in historical context, there's truly nothing like hearing someone's stories unfold organically. Through sharing longer oral histories, we invite each other to welcome slowness, practice trust in first-person narratives, and recenter indigenous structures of storytelling.
Last year, we worked with 2023 Artist as Instigator, an assistant professor of critical ethnic and Black studies at Xavier University, Dr. Shadon Booby Battle, in an archives and artists pairing sponsored by 60 Inches from Center. Together, we expanded our oral history archives selection of interviews related to footwork culture, exploring its capacity as a safer space for archiving stories that could be unsafe for the storyteller to preserve in words.
And through these interviews, as well as others in the archive, we learned that it was not only the capacity of footwork specifically. Many public housing residents were in deep relationship to their built environment and thinking about how to expand the capacity of everything around them. What one might only see as a pencil, a young person at Daniel Hale Williams Elementary School might be using as a drumstick to make beats.
Nekita Thomas kicks off this season-long exploration. She grew up in the Dearborn homes, a part of the 4-mile State Street corridor on the south side of Chicago. She lived in Dearborn from her birth in 1989 through 2003, when her family moved to Chicago Housing Authority's scattered sites. As a graphic designer, Nekita tells a story we all can learn from, about the work her and her community did to build new worlds that could accurately represent and serve their needs, while staying present with each other in a world where many of those needs were not met.
Please enjoy this episode of Black Creative Innovation in Chicago Public Housing, The Artsy Kid in the Hood, an abridged oral history of Miss Nekita Thomas.
I have a lot of beautiful memories from living in Dearborn. I primarily stayed in one building the entire time that I was there, 2701. It's interesting because the way that the Dearborns is kind of positioned, you have 4 buildings that fall in the 2700 range, and that it's separated by a field house and like a really big field where we play softball and things like that from the 2900 block, then 2800 block of Dearborn homes, which I think is really interesting. And so we were a part of a really big community, but the 4 buildings that were at 27th Street were pretty intimate. Like everyone got a chance to know each other really well versus sort of having to know the entirety of all of Dearborn homes, right? My family also are from Louisiana. This is my mom's side, who primarily stayed in Dearborn homes. And when they were younger, they actually lost a lot of their photos from when they were kids. And that became really important for my family to like document. our history through photos. So I have photos from the time that I was in the hospital until now. And so I can see like everything that was happening around me. And that kind of gets tricky because people ask me to explain my, relationship to Dearborn Homes. And I think about that and I was like, why does it feel like I could remember way more stuff than I should? And it's really because those pictures are filling in a lot of different memories. Something that was so important to Dearborn Homes was Daniel Hill Williams Elementary School, which it's no longer called Daniel Hill Williams, but this school literally, there was a parking lot between my building and Daniel Hill Williams. Really huge school, very beautiful architecturally. Like when I look back at that building, it was like so grand. But all of the kids, no matter if you were on the 27th side or the 29th side, we all went to that one school. And we were super close. And the school, because it's named after Daniel Hill Williams, the first Black open heart surgeon, they focused on teaching us our history. So we're singing the American, anthem, but we're also singing right after that, Lift Every Voice and Sing, which is fun. I mean, I have memories of friends like totally putting their own Lift Every Voice. I mean, it was crazy. So people got like interested in that, like Black history plays. It was always something. So I would say that my closest sort of like bonds, fictive kinship sort of bonds started at that school. Like those were my people. And also it's not surprising to me, like being in a creative field right now in my life, all of the friends that I had during that time were creative in some respect, whether that was fashion, whether that was dance, whether that was making art and things like that, wordplay. It was like, I look at where they are right now and I was like, of course you were my friend. Like you were the artsy kid in the hood. Like, how didn't we see that? Like we didn't put that together. So
why do you think that school turned all of y'all into like artists?
Oh my God, that's a really great question. I think it was really because of how activated they were in teaching us about Black history beyond like, this is what slavery is. It was a lot of like, this is what joy looks like. Let's go on these field trips to like it was interesting, the field trips that they even took us on, like to the shared aquarium. Of course, everyone sort of like goes there, but we were also going to like urban gardens at that time when we were in school. I remember going to urban gardens. That was like a yearly field trip for our science courses, but it was also a lot of just creative expression. So we had our cheerleading teams. I was on a cheerleading team. We had like these little fun days that would happen every year before we got out in summer. And I have some very particular stories about that, like big now later jars and like, guess how many now laters in this big container? You could win them and like take them home. But it was also the amount of plays that they had. We had a play, I kid you not, like every 3 months at that school. So it wasn't just like a Black History Month play. It was the Christmas play. We did an Easter. Like we did all types of plays. And I think that maybe sort of activated something in us too, to be imagining a role in that way. I think that plays a really big part. And someone would do the costume, someone would do the background, someone would do the hands-on production. It's always been fascinating to me where I grew up and like how people actually survive where I grew up. A lot of my own research and sort of thinking, the stuff that keeps me up at night is around the ways in which Blackness is spatialized, right? Whether that's through the media or whether that's through just like buildings and sort of landscape and things like that. And I was going back through my family's photos, which I mentioned, we've taken photos my entire life because my family lost their photos and they find it really sad that they can't reference how they looked when they were younger. But going through those photos, I noticed the amount of crates that we use, like plastic milk crates. Those milk crates were everything from like a bed frame, and it's one of the sturdiest bed frames to this day. Put your bed on there, you all right. Lift it up, 2-3 crates high. Have fun. But it was also the bookshelf, and it was also multiple other things because I think what people have had the most access to in a way that the milk crate has been remixed is through the milk crate as a rim, like a basketball hoop. But in my house, it was just so many other things. Obviously, it was like, we didn't necessarily have a stoop in the hood. Like, I actually, like, recently thought about that. Like, architects love to use, like, the word stoop. And I was like, we ain't had no damn stoop. What did we have? What was that space that was in the front of my house or whatever? But we would use it to sit on it and all of those other things. But there were some particular moments of looking back through that sort of archive of like photos and how we use crates and things that started to stand out, and it was recalling sort of memories that I had. So I mentioned that my house was the quote unquote house party house. I hope she doesn't like kill me for saying it like that, but she loves music to this day. She's a sad doll. She just loves to live life, passionate. But I particularly remember one day, she was like hooking up her speakers, like the brown speakers with the big amplifier in the front, that cushiony round circle that we all know from those old brown speakers. But she had put the speaker on top of a crate, and she said that it changed the sound in the house, like the way the music reverberated off of the floor. Cause I don't know what material that floor was, but it was something that it shouldn't have been. And then, you know, we had like cinder block walls. I mean, so she said it changed the soundscape in the house. And I thought that was pretty brilliant. And it was that moment I was like, oh shoot, my mom is not necessarily a visual artist or anything like that, but she's a creator. She's been an innovator my whole entire life. To see someone build a bed frame out of those crates, that's also innovative. And I chose at this point to see it as innovation and not just survival, even though we know the politics of that is built into what they were doing. 2 kids, single mom, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that was powerful.
Yeah, DJ Clint has one of the same stories, right? And so this is the era, he was talking about the 90s, and Ghetto House was, you know, he was on the cusp of the transition from house and ghetto house. And for him, he was talking about how he would use the cinder block walls to change the claps, the sounds of the claps that you hear in house music, the 4 on the floor, you know, the sonic elements or whatever. And he would say, like, you know, first of all, the walls were so hard that he still has scars on his on his hands, because he said that it changed the sound of the claps in the music. Well, he doesn't call it ghetto house, he calls it like project house music. You've also mentioned how you use like critical race theory to think about design. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So when I was in undergrad, like I knew that I wanted to do something creative. And also school wasn't an option in my house. Like you had to go to school. Like that was the thing. And when I went to undergrad, I decided to study graphic design. I was also the only Black student in all 4 years of the graphic design program. We also had a master's level graphic design program. No Black kids in that program either. So throughout my entire career in graphic design at the University of Illinois, only Black student. However, a man upstairs so happily aligned me with John Jennings, Afrofuturist comic book artist, beautiful soul. Not only was he a really great mentor, but he kind of like cracked my whole worldview open. And what he was doing at the time was making these like Black heroes and like digging up their stories. Like right now he's working with Marvel and the Black Silver Surfer, and like he does this work around Black Kirby. Jack Kirby is like a comic book artist that everyone knows, but he's like, but we make that Black. And so explore all of the sort of heroes that come out of that. And I took all of John's classes, not only because he's just brilliant, but also because he was Black. And it wasn't like a distant sort of Blackness. It was like, oh no, you from Jackson, Mississippi, and we know to laugh at the same things. Like we know to, get mad at the same thing. Like we have some type of like closeness and kinship that's happening there. And so naturally you spend a lot of time with your mentors and people that you're inspired by. And he was working on sort of building out, and this was during his like 10-year track. So he was going up for 10-year. But he was building out this practice of critical race design studies. And so what it does is it takes critical race theory and it intersects that with design. And so the premise of it is that everything in this world has been designed, including race. So race is a construction, and therefore it can be redesigned. And so if we do that, what do we begin to prioritize? What are the principles, the mindsets, the type of aesthetics, all of those things? And I just naturally just took off from there. And so knowing that John was into like comic books, he in his classes would ask us to like do these projects. It was like these like quick sort of quick fire like challenges, and one day it'll be like draw yourself in a future, or these sort of things where we'll draw one part and someone else will draw another part to see how other people think about how we're represented versus how we think about we're represented. It was really interesting, like a social experiment. But it was through those assignments of like drawing myself with John over and over again through different types of challenges that I started to understand what I was interested in. And it wasn't necessarily comic book artists or comics and comic heroes. I think that was like my brother's age group. Like he grew up watching Gargoyle Saturday morning, like cartoons. I did it with him because that's my bro. But I was interested in something else. I was interested in like Legos and Connects. I don't know if y'all remember Connects, like the toys. Like that's the stuff that I was interested in. I never really was a Barbie girl. I never like played like this voice versus this voice, even though my cousin who's my age did. I was like, how do you make that up? I don't get that. But if it was building some stuff, I was building stuff. I was building things. And naturally, I think like over time of doing that reflection, it started to be about like the built environment. And I was like, that's what I'm interested in. But I think I got away from the question.
No.
I think I got away from the question.
Yeah, right on.
Because I'm just like blackness in the built environment. What happens when I build that?
No, that's a good segue into, so like how then did you begin thinking about critical race theory and its application to like Chicago and housing violence and public housing structures? Yeah.
Oh my God, you're so good. That to me, okay, so the program that I was in, like they were very lucky to have John doing something that was like very untraditional from what you're typically taught in graphic design. There was also someone else who, Eric Benson, who's still at the University of Illinois, whose work is on like sustainable design, environmental design. Both what John was doing around critical race design studies and what Eric Benson were doing around environmental sustainable design, those were untraditional things in graphic design. Most of the time when people think about graphic design, they think logos, they think websites, they think all of typography, color, image, things like that. So primarily I was learning that. I thought that I also wanted to go into doing that. I did a little bit, but it felt a little bit unfulfilling, and I sort of switched paths and went into a master's degree and blah, 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 blah. But during that time of undergrad, what I like gravitated towards the most was branding. Something about branding was like, I love this. It's like the hood fabulous thing for me to do. Like I think about Dapper Ned and I'm like, he was so commercial, but so like raw and like, you know what I mean? Taking his materials and remixing, and it was stylish. And I was like, oh, that's genuine. And that's not you didn't do it in a sellout sort of way. So he's been on like my vision board of like people who inspire me forever. And so y'all can see where I get excited. But I think about that and I was like, branding is that thing for me. Like it's the place where people come to get a logo. But it was more than just a logo. It was like, this is how you want the world to see you represented. And so I started to think about like how people like Dapper Dan were doing what they were doing in their own lane and fashion and keeping it raw and remixing, and it still had like a commercial aspect to it. So it wasn't just about the hood, right? It was about how you really tap into the things that are innately in you from how you grew up, your mindsets and all of that. And you learn that it's a larger sort of level of industry that you can apply that to, that I don't think anybody else can do. Not in the ways that you do it when you kind of grow up with a certain like level of grit and remixing and sort of like teaching your own self and stuff like that. So branding became my thing. It was all about identity and representation. And we got this chance when I was in my senior year for the first time to do whatever you wanted to do for a 116-week course. It's called the Graphic Design Capstone. It's like any thesis project for a senior student. And they said, what do you want to do? So I had just been through all of those quick fire exercises with John Jennings. I was going through all that branding, traditional graphic design, sort of like courses in the program. And I said, oh, you want to know what? I'm reflecting on the fact that I just moved out of Dearborn Homes. And I'm also reflecting on the fact that there's a big conversation that's happening in Chicago around what's going to happen to those buildings. And people are already being displaced and moved out. And I see State Street downtown coming closer and closer and closer and closer to 21st Street, where you hit Hillier Homes, where my auntie used to stay. And so it's starting to look different. And so I started to imagine what is that going to look like when downtown State Street just grows across the State Street of the corridor, the public housing corridor. And so that led me into a conversation around how gentrification, like what is it going to mean to gentrify the State Street corridor for public housing? And I did my project on that, my capstone project. So I made branding to talk about that issue. I was doing silk screen, you silk screen like stuff onto a shirt, like screen printing. And I took an aerial view from Google Maps of the buildings in Dearborn Homes, and they were like these, they look like X's from the sky, which I think is so wild, but they look like X's. And I was taking that as the visual language and silk screening it onto beautiful fabrics. And gentrification is all about somebody making money, but are y'all thinking about the histories and the people and the things that you all are displacing? So it was kind of like a social justice project at the end, but it was also using the poetics of graphic design and branding in order to do it.
Nekita's graphic design career continued to flourish after graduating. She earned a Master of Fine Arts in Visual Studies from University at Buffalo, New York, and is now an associate professor at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. You can find more information about her work at nekitathomas.com.
Unfortunately, her concerns about the gentrification of the State Street corridor also became reality. Chicago's plan for transformation led to the demolition of nearly 7,000 units of public housing just in the corridor. The Dearborn Homes are one of the only two public housing complexes still on State Street.
This episode of Out of the Archives was curated, written, and edited by me, Jellystone Robinson.
And me, Liu Chen. If you haven't already, please rate, review, share, and subscribe to our show. And stay tuned for our next episode. We'll start this season's slow travel back in time with DJ Sluggo, a Robert Taylor Homes resident and one of the founders of ghetto house music. This episode was mixed and mastered by Robert Van Franken. The theme song for Out of the Archives is Born in the Blues, written, performed, and recorded by Keith Hudson, a former Stateway Gardens resident. We've also featured Lift Every Voice and Sing, written by James Weldon Johnson and Jay Rosamond Johnson, and performed by Clarence Simpson under Creative Commons licensing. Other music featured in this episode are in the show notes. Out of the Archives is made possible through the generous support of the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation, the Illinois Arts Council Agency, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the Chicago Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. You can help support this podcast by donating or becoming a member of the National Public Housing Museum at nphm.org/join-give.
We'd like to give one last huge thanks to our oral history narrator, Nekita Thomas, as well as our oral historian, Dr. Shadon Booby Battle.
Visit our public oral history archive at nphm.org/listen to hear more about how growing up in public housing shaped Nekita's journey to becoming a professor of graphic design. You can also find more full-length interviews with public housing residents, resources about the history and culture discussed in this episode, and our previous episodes of Out of the Archives at nphm.org/listen.
Thank you so much for joining us. See you next time.